My name is Naomi Carter. I'm 32 years old, and the easiest way to explain what has been happening inside my marriage is this. I didn't realize I had become a visitor in my own home until the night my husband told me to feed myself like I was asking him for a favor, instead of coming home half dead after paying for the life we all lived. I work as a field technician for a telecommunications company. It sounds technical and tidy when you say it quickly, but there is nothing tidy about the job. It is heat, steel, scraped knuckles, cramped equipment rooms, long drives, emergency calls, and the kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones before the sun goes down. Some days I come home sore. Some days I come home numb. And some days I come home so tired I can feel my heartbeat in the backs of my knees. I had one of those days last week. But the truth is, the real story started long before that. When Landon and I first got together 5 years ago, our relationship felt balanced in the way people always hope love will feel balanced. He was working full-time then, doing marketing work, and I was already in telecom. We split dinner costs. We took turns cooking. We stayed up too late talking in the kitchen while dishes dried on the rack. It felt grown, stable, mutual. He had been through a messy divorce from the mother of his kids before I met him. From the way he told it, she had been unreliable, inconsistent, always in and out emotionally, even when she was physically around. Ryan was little then. Sophie was even younger. They needed structure, and I understood that. I never stepped into that situation because someone forced me to. I stepped in because I loved him, and because loving him seemed to include loving the fragile, unfinished shape of the family he was trying to hold together. Back then, I believed that if I showed up with patience, loyalty, and enough strength, I could help build something steady. After Landon and I got married, he decided to cut back on work and focus more on being available for Ryan and Sophie. At the time, it felt reasonable. The kids had already lived through enough instability. He said freelancing from home would give them consistency. I said yes before he even finished explaining, because that was the kind of woman I believed I was supposed to be in love. Supportive, reliable, the one who could carry more when the person she loved needed her to. So I carried more. Then I carried almost everything. I took over the mortgage, the utilities, most of the groceries, the car payment, and all the quiet, unglamorous costs that keep a household from collapsing. Landon still worked freelance graphic design, maybe 15 or 20 hours a week, enough to bring in some money, enough to make it sound like the arrangement was shared. I never held it against him. I never sat down with a calculator and turned love into math. I told myself we were building a life, and sometimes building a life means one person carries the heavier side of the weight for a while. What I didn't understand was that for a while had slowly turned into the entire structure of our relationship. That day started before sunrise. There had been equipment failures at 3 different towers across the county, which meant one problem, stacking on top of another, each one urgent, each one dirty, each one keeping me farther and farther from home. By late afternoon, my uniform was soaked through with sweat. My hands smelled like metal and dust. I had a scrape along one knee from crawling through a narrow service space, and I could already feel the bruises that would darken by morning. I hadn't eaten since noon. By the time I finished the last call and got back in the truck, it was after 10. I remember driving home with that strange kind of fatigue where the world outside the windshield starts to feel unreal. Streetlights, empty intersections, storefronts already dark. I kept thinking about food in the most basic human way. Something warm, something easy, something that would make the day feel over. When I walked into the house, the kitchen lights were still on. Landon was at the sink, rinsing dishes. The kids were already in their rooms. The house had that late-night stillness families have when the evening has ended without you. I set my keys down, kicked off my boots, and opened the fridge. Nothing. No leftovers. No covered plate. No container pushed to the back with my name unspoken but understood. Just condiments, half a carton of milk, juice boxes, cut fruit for the kids, and ingredients that would require more energy than I had left. I turned and asked, "Hey, is there any dinner left?" He didn't even look at me. He just kept rinsing a plate and said, "You're an adult. Cook for yourself." For a second, I honestly thought I had misheard him. Not because the words were unclear, because something in me refused to believe that was what my husband had chosen to say to me in that moment. I stood there with the refrigerator door still open, cold air spilling over my arm, and said, "What?" That was when he turned around. He had this annoyed expression on his face, like I was making the evening harder for him just by existing inside it. "I made dinner for the kids at 6, he said. "You weren't here. I'm not running a restaurant where people can just show up whenever they want and expect food to be waiting." There are moments when humiliation does not arrive loudly. It arrives quietly, almost politely, and that somehow makes it worse. I stared at him, still trying to catch up emotionally with what had just happened. "I was at work," I said. "I left before 6 this morning. I didn't exactly decide to come home late for fun." He shrugged. That shrug did something to me. Not the dinner, not even the sentence. The shrug. As if my absence from that house was some private hobby, instead of the reason half that house existed. "You chose that job," he said. "You chose to take the overtime. Don't expect me to rearrange my whole night because you can't manage your schedule." My whole body was aching by then, but something sharper cut through the exhaustion. My choice? I wanted to ask him whether he thought the mortgage paid itself, whether Ryan's soccer fees, Sophie's art supplies, the groceries, the internet, and the car he drove the kids around in all floated into our lives out of thin air. I wanted to ask him when exactly my labor had become so invisible that he could look straight at it and still call it a personal scheduling problem. But I was too tired to fight for my own humanity in my own kitchen. So I closed the fridge, took out bread and peanut butter, and made myself the saddest meal I'd had in years. He went back to what he was doing. No apology, no softening, no, I didn't mean it like that. Nothing. I ate standing at the counter because I didn't trust myself to sit down at the table and pretend I belonged there. That should have been the end of it. One ugly moment, one bad night, the kind of thing you revisit in the morning and fix with honesty. Instead, it opened something in me that would not close again. Because once the shock wore off, I couldn't stop thinking about the way he had looked at me. Not angry, not guilty, not even conflicted. Bothered. Like I was some random roommate who had wandered in too late and expected special treatment. And the worst part was that when I let myself be honest, it didn't feel entirely new. It felt familiar. It felt like the truth of our relationship finally saying itself out loud. The more I sat with it, the more other moments started lining up behind it like witnesses. Landon's mother had come to stay with us the month before for nearly a week. Every dinner that week had felt like watching a family through a window while sitting inside the room with them. Landon, his mother, Ryan, and Sophie all talking at once about school, cousins, old stories, neighborhood gossip, weekend plans. Every now and then someone would glance at me and ask how work was, the way you ask a polite question of someone you do not really expect to answer in full. One night, his mother was flipping through old photos on her phone, showing Sophie pictures of Landon when he was a child. Sophie laughed at one of them, and his mother smiled and said, "Look at that face. She looks so much like her dad." Then she turned the phone toward me and said, "You can really see the family resemblance, can't you, Naomi?" I remember smiling because what else was I supposed to do? But something in me had gone still. The phrasing had been harmless on its surface. Anyone else would have missed it. But I didn't miss it. I heard the boundary underneath it. Them, and then me. Their family, and then the woman sitting at the table helping pay for it. Even the children, sweet as they were, sometimes mirrored that invisible line without meaning to. Ryan would ask Landon for permission first, even on things I handled. Sophie would run to show him drawings before she showed me. And I never blamed them for that. Kids follow emotional maps adults build for them. If they learned I was dependable but somehow secondary, they learned it from the atmosphere in the house, not from anything I said. I love those kids. I still do. That is what made the loneliness so hard to name. Because this wasn't a house full of monsters. It was a house full of people who had slowly gotten used to my giving without ever stopping to ask what it cost me. By the time I got into bed that night, I was too tired to cry and too awake to sleep. Landon came in maybe 20 minutes later. He slid under the covers like nothing had happened. No conversation, no reaching for me, no sense that there was a wound in the room. I lay there in the dark beside him and stared at the ceiling, listening to his breathing settle, and I had the strangest thought. If I disappeared from this relationship tomorrow, what exactly would he miss first? Me, or what I paid for? That question stayed with me longer than the exhaustion did. And once it took shape, I couldn't unhear it. The next morning, nothing was said about it. That was the first confirmation that it hadn't been a misunderstanding. If you hurt someone you love, even accidentally, there is usually a moment after, an attempt to soften it, to explain, to reach back across whatever line was crossed. But the silence the next morning wasn't careful. It wasn't thoughtful. It was normal. Landon moved through the kitchen like he always did. Coffee, emails, quick check-in with the kids. No hesitation when he passed me. No second look. No sign that the night before had meant anything more to him than a minor inconvenience that had already been filed away and forgotten. That was when something inside me shifted. Not dramatically, just quietly, like a door closing. All day at work, between calls and repairs and the constant low hum of machinery, I kept replaying it. Not the words, those were already burned in, but the pattern behind them, the way it fit too easily into everything else I had been ignoring. By the time I drove home that evening, I had made a decision. If I was going to be treated like someone responsible only for herself, then I would start living like it. Exactly like he told me to. Monday, I stopped at the grocery store before heading home. For the first time in years, I didn't think about what the kids liked. I didn't check prices with that automatic internal voice reminding me to stretch every dollar. I didn't calculate portions in my head for 4 people. I just bought what I wanted. A good cut of steak, fresh pasta, good bread, a bottle of something I would normally consider unnecessary. Small things, ordinary things. But they didn't feel small. They felt deliberate. When I got home, Landon was in the living room with the kids, some show playing, laughter, the easy rhythm of a life that didn't seem to notice my absence or my presence either way. I walked past them without interrupting and went straight into the kitchen. I cooked slowly, not because I had the energy, because I didn't, but because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't rushing to meet anyone else's needs before my own. I seasoned the steak the way I liked it. I let the pasta cook just right instead of overcooking it because someone else preferred it softer. I plated everything carefully, almost out of habit, and then caught myself. For years, my habits had been shaped around making sure everyone else was comfortable first. I carried my plate out of the kitchen. Landon looked up, just for a second. There was a flicker of something in his expression. Confusion, maybe. But it passed quickly. He didn't ask anything, didn't comment, didn't question why there was only one plate. I sat down at the counter and started eating. No one said a word. The kids kept watching their show. Landon glanced at me once or twice, like he was trying to figure out what exactly was happening, but not enough to actually engage with it. And I realized something in that moment. Silence wasn't uncomfortable for him. It was convenient. Tuesday, I had the day off. I woke up early out of habit, even though I didn't have to. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to feel peaceful, but now felt distant. I went into the kitchen and made breakfast. Real breakfast. Eggs, bacon, toast. Coffee that wasn't rushed or reheated 3 times before I finished it. I moved through it easily, the way you do when you have done something for other people so many times that doing it for yourself feels almost strange. When I sat down to eat, Landon came downstairs. He paused when he saw me. Then he looked at the stove, the counter, the empty plates. "Where's mine?" he asked. There it was. Not "good morning." Not "that smells good." Not even curiosity. Just expectation. I took a sip of my coffee before answering. "You're an adult," I said calmly. "Cook for yourself." The words landed harder in the air than they had the night before. I saw it in his face. That brief flash of disbelief, like I had just stepped outside of the role he had quietly assigned to me without ever saying it out loud. "What?" he said. I met his eyes. "That's what you told me," I replied. "I'm just taking your advice." For a second, I thought he might push it, turn it into an argument, demand an explanation. Instead, he just stared at me. Then he shook his head slightly, like he couldn't decide if I was being serious or dramatic, and walked over to the fridge. He grabbed a yogurt, peeled it open, and left the kitchen without another word. But the air felt different after that. Not tense, unsettled, like something had shifted just enough that it couldn't be ignored anymore, even if no one was ready to talk about it. Wednesday, Landon mentioned he was taking the kids to see a movie that night. He said it casually, like it was already decided. Like it always was. In the past, I would have paused whatever I was doing and asked if I could join, or suggested we all go together, or adjusted my schedule so I could be part of it. This time I just nodded. "Sounds good," I said. That was it. No follow-up, no attempt to insert myself into the plan. After work, instead of heading straight home, I texted a coworker I hadn't seen outside of work in months. Her name was Melissa. We used to grab drinks sometimes after long shifts, back before I started feeling like every hour I wasn't home needed to be justified. She replied almost immediately. "Thought you disappeared," she wrote. "Something like that," I typed back. We met at a small place not far from my route home. Nothing fancy, just noise, conversation, and the kind of easy presence that doesn't ask you to shrink to fit into it. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to explain where I was. I didn't feel like I was late for something. I just existed. We talked about work, about nothing, about everything. Time slipped the way it used to, before my life started revolving around a structure that didn't seem to include me. When I got home, it was a little after 9. The house was quiet again. Landon was in the living room. He looked up when I walked in, and this time there was no mistaking the edge in his voice. "Where were you?" he asked. I set my keys down. "Out," I said simply. "With who?" "Melissa, from work." He frowned slightly. "You didn't think to ask if we wanted to do something together tonight?" I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was so predictable. "You already had plans," I said. "You told me you were taking the kids to a movie." "That's different," he said quickly. "Is it?" I asked. He opened his mouth, then closed it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. And in that silence, I felt something settle into place inside me. This wasn't about dinner. It had never been about dinner. Thursday, I came home to find Ryan sitting at the kitchen table with his math homework spread out in front of him. He looked up when I walked in, relief flashing across his face. "Hey, can you help me with this?" he asked. I paused, because this was the part that hurt. Not Landon. Ryan. The kids had never treated me badly. They had just grown up inside a dynamic they didn't create. And I had been part of reinforcing it. I glanced over at Landon. He was sitting a few feet away, laptop open, focused on something on the screen. "I think your dad can help you," I said gently. Ryan hesitated. "He's busy." "So was I replied quietly. Landon looked up at that. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, irritation already creeping into his tone. "I worked all day," I said. "I'm tired." Ryan looked between us, confused. Landon sighed, like the situation itself was inconvenient, and pushed his laptop aside. "Come on," he said to Ryan. "Let's see it." Ryan gathered his papers and moved over, but not before giving me a small, uncertain look. I held his gaze for a second and gave him a soft smile. It wasn't his fault, but something inside me tightened anyway. Because for the first time, I wasn't automatically stepping in to fill the gaps. And suddenly, those gaps were visible. Friday was when it broke open. I got home earlier than usual. The house smelled like spaghetti sauce. Landon was in the kitchen, stirring a pot. The kids were setting the table. For 3. He saw me. There was a brief moment where he seemed to consider something. Then he turned back to the stove without saying anything. No extra plate. No adjustment. No acknowledgement. So I didn't make one either. I walked past them, took out bread and cheese, and made myself a grilled sandwich. The same quiet, deliberate way I had been doing everything that week. When I sat down at the counter to eat, Ryan looked over. "Why aren't you eating spaghetti with us?" he asked. Before I could answer, Landon spoke. "What's wrong with you this week?" he snapped. "You're acting like you don't even live here anymore." I set my sandwich down, and for the first time all week, I looked directly at him. "I'm just taking care of myself," I said calmly, starting with cooking for myself. The words hung in the air. He stared at me, frustration rising fast now. "That's not what I meant," he said. "You're being ridiculous. You're taking this way too far." I tilted my head slightly. "Then explain what you meant," I said. He opened his mouth, paused, closed it again. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the stove and the quiet clink of utensils as the kids shifted uncomfortably. "You know what I meant," he said finally, but there was less certainty in his voice now. "No," I replied, "I don't." And that was the moment I realized something important. He couldn't explain it, because explaining it would mean saying out loud what had always been understood without words, that I was expected to give. And he was allowed to choose when and if he gave anything back. I glanced at the kids and let the conversation drop. Not because it was over, because it was just beginning. And this time, I wasn't going to ignore where it led. That night, after the house went quiet, I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't scroll through my phone. I didn't try to distract myself the way I usually did when something felt off, but I didn't want to look at it too closely. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, and for the first time in a long time, I started paying attention. Not to feelings, to facts. I logged into our joint bank account. At first, everything looked normal. Bills paid, groceries, utilities, the steady rhythm of a household running in the background of our lives. But then I slowed down, line by line, transaction by transaction, and the pattern started to show itself. In the last 3 months, there was over $1,200 spent on clothes, outings, and little extras for Landon and the kids. Movie tickets, new shoes, subscription boxes, things that, on their own, weren't unreasonable. But when I tried to remember the last time I had bought something for myself that wasn't work-related, I couldn't. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen. Not because I was angry, because I was starting to understand something I hadn't let myself see clearly before. This wasn't imbalance. This was structure. I kept scrolling. A charge for Sophie's art supplies. No hesitation. A charge for Ryan's soccer cleats, the expensive ones. No discussion. A hair appointment for Landon. $180. no mention until after it showed up in the account. I rubbed my thumb against the edge of the table, a quiet habit I had when I was thinking too hard. Because again, none of those things individually were the problem. I wasn't resentful about providing. I had chosen this life. But choice stops being choice when it becomes expectation without acknowledgement. And expectation turns into something else entirely when it only flows in one direction. I closed the banking app and just sat there for a moment. Then another memory surfaced. It was small, almost forgettable. A few weeks ago, I had mentioned needing new work boots. Mine were worn down, the soles thinning out from climbing and long shifts. I remembered standing in that same kitchen, leaning against the counter, mentioning it casually. I should probably get new boots this weekend, I had said. Landon hadn't even looked up from his phone. That's a work expense, right? He said. Your company should cover that. They give us a yearly allowance, I explained. I already used most of it on other safety gear. He had shrugged. Well, you'll figure it out. That was it. No offer to help, no suggestion to pull from the joint account. No, we'll take care of it. Just you'll figure it out. And yet, when Sophie had wanted that new easel, there hadn't been a conversation. When Ryan needed new cleats, there hadn't been hesitation. When Landon booked his appointment, there hadn't been a second thought. I let out a slow breath. It wasn't about the money. It was about what the money represented. I wasn't part of the decision-making. I wasn't part of the consideration. I was the source, the provider, the background system that kept everything running. And suddenly, everything else started to make sense. The dinners I wasn't included in. The plans that didn't involve me. The way conversations flowed around me instead of through me. I had thought those were emotional disconnects. They weren't. They were symptoms. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. I'm not his partner, I thought. I'm his solution. The realization didn't hit like a wave. It settled. Heavy. Certain. And once it settled, I couldn't push it away again. The next morning, I made a call. Not to Landon. To a lawyer. Her name was Denise Parker. Someone from work had mentioned her months ago, in passing, when we were talking about contracts and liability. I had saved the number without thinking I would ever need it. Now I did. When her assistant answered, my voice was steady. I'd like to schedule a consultation, I said. There was a brief pause as she pulled up availability. Is this regarding divorce? She asked. The word landed heavier than I expected. Not because it shocked me, because hearing it out loud made it real. Yes, I said. We set a time for the following Monday. After I hung up, I sat there for a moment with my phone still in my hand. I didn't feel dramatic. I didn't feel impulsive. I felt clear. And that clarity was more unsettling than anger ever could have been. Over the next few days, nothing outwardly changed. I still went to work, still came home, still moved through the same rooms, the same routines. But internally, something had shifted completely. I started noticing everything. The way Landon spoke to me versus how he spoke to the kids. The way decisions were made without me. The way my presence was assumed when it was useful and ignored when it wasn't. Friday night, he mentioned taking the kids to visit his sister over the weekend. Not asking. Informing. I just nodded. Okay, I said. He hesitated like he was waiting for more. For questions. For engagement. For me to step back into the role I had been slowly stepping out of all week. But I didn't. And for the first time, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Uncertainty. It flickered across his face for just a second before he looked away. Monday came faster than I expected. I sat across from Denise in her office, hands folded loosely in my lap. She was straightforward, efficient, the kind of person who didn't waste time dressing things up. After I explained my situation, she nodded once. No shared children, she said. That simplifies things. The house? She asked. In my name, I replied. I bought it before we got married. She made a note. Then legally, that's in your favor. There may be some claim to equity depending on improvements made during the marriage, but it won't be a full split. What about spousal support? I asked. She looked at me over her glasses. He works, she said. Even part-time. That matters. Based on what you've told me, any support would likely be limited, if at all. I absorbed that quietly. Not because I was relieved, because I was processing what it meant. I had options, real ones. For so long, I had felt stuck without ever fully admitting it to myself. Now I wasn't. Denise closed the folder. You're not asking the wrong questions, she said. You're just asking them late. I gave a small, humorless smile. Yeah, I said. I'm starting to realize that. She slid a document toward me. If you decide to proceed, we can file as early as this week, she said. I looked down at the paper, then back up at her. I'm not ready to file yet, I said. I want to have one more conversation first. She nodded. That's fair, she said. Just make sure you're not having it to convince yourself to stay in something you already know isn't working. Her words stayed with me long after I left. That evening, I sat in my car in the driveway for a full minute before going inside. The house looked the same. Nothing about it had changed, but I had. And I knew, walking through that door, that whatever happened next was going to decide everything. I wasn't going to hint anymore. I wasn't going to adjust. I wasn't going to hope he noticed. This time I was going to say it. All of it. And if he still couldn't hear me after that, then I already knew what came next. I waited until the house was quiet, until Ryan and Sophie were asleep, until the TV was off, until there was nothing left to distract either of us from what needed to be said. "Can we talk?" I asked. Landon was on the couch, half looking at his phone. He glanced up, already guarded in that subtle way people get when they sense something serious coming but don't want to deal with it. "About what?" he said. "Us." That word was enough. He sighed, set his phone down, and leaned back like he was preparing for something inconvenient rather than important. "Okay," he said. "What's going on?" I sat across from him. For a moment, I just looked at him. 3 years of marriage, 5 years together, a whole life built in small, quiet decisions, and I was about to find out if any of it had actually been shared. "I feel like a stranger in my own home," I said. There it was. Simple, direct, no anger, just truth. He frowned immediately. "That's not true," he said. "You're being dramatic." I didn't react to that. I had expected it. "I'm not talking about one moment," I continued calmly. "I'm talking about a pattern. The dinners, the plans, the way I'm not included in decisions, the way my needs come last every time." He shook his head, already dismissing it. "That's not a pattern. That's just life. That's how families work." I let that sit between us for a second. "Families work by treating one person like an afterthought?" I asked quietly. "Don't twist what I'm saying," he snapped. "You act like I don't do anything. I take care of the house. I manage the kids. I work too." "I know you do," I said. "This isn't about whether you do anything. It's about whether you see me as your partner or just the person who makes everything possible." That made him pause, just for a second. Then the defensiveness came back, sharper this time. "So now I'm using you," he said. "That's what this is? You think I'm some kind of gold digger?" "I didn't say that," I replied evenly. "I'm saying I don't feel valued, and I haven't for a long time." He leaned forward, frustration building. "You expect me to what? Wait on you hand and foot every time you come home late?" he said. "You expect me to be your personal chef because you work long hours?" "That's not what I asked for," I said. But he kept going. "Most people would be grateful for what they have instead of picking apart every little thing," he added. That word again. Grateful. I took a slow breath. "Do you know what hurt about that night?" I asked. "It wasn't the food." He didn't answer. "It was the way you looked at me," I continued, "like I was an inconvenience, like I didn't belong in the life I'm helping pay for." His jaw tightened. "You're overthinking it," he said. I was tired. It was a long day. So was mine. Silence. It stretched longer this time. I didn't fill it. I let it sit there, heavy and undeniable. "I tried to talk about this before," I said after a moment. "About a year ago. I mentioned counseling." He rolled his eyes slightly. "Because you were creating problems that didn't exist," he said. That was the moment something in me went completely still. Not hurt, not anger, clarity. "I wasn't creating them," I said quietly. "I was noticing them." He shook his head again, like he couldn't believe we were even having this conversation. "You're making this way bigger than it needs to be," he said. "All marriages go through rough patches." "Rough patches don't last years," I replied. That landed. I saw it in his expression. A flicker, then gone. I leaned forward slightly. "Let me ask you something," I said. He didn't respond, but he didn't interrupt either. "What do you think you bring to this relationship besides what I provide financially?" I asked. He blinked. "Excuse me?" "It's a simple question," I said. His expression hardened. "I take care of this house," he said. "I take care of the kids. I make sure everything runs." "You were doing that before we got married," I said. That stopped him. Not completely, but enough. "And I still am," he said, but there was less certainty now. I nodded slowly. "Okay," I said. "What do I bring?" He didn't hesitate this time. "You're a good provider," he said. "And you're decent with the kids." Decent. I let that word settle. "Anything else?" I asked. He hesitated. Just long enough. And that was all I needed. Because in that pause, I heard everything he couldn't say, or didn't think to. "Do you love me?" I asked. "Or do you love what I provide?" His head snapped up. "Of course I love you," he said, irritation flaring. "What kind of question is that?" "The kind that shouldn't be hard to answer," I replied. "I just answered it," he said. "You're trying to trap me with these questions." "I'm trying to understand where I stand," I said. "You're my wife," he said. "Isn't that obvious?" "No," I said softly. "It's not." He looked at me like he didn't recognize the version of me sitting across from him. Maybe he didn't, because this version wasn't trying to keep the peace anymore. Let me ask you something else, I said. He exhaled sharply. What? If I lost my job tomorrow, I said, holding his gaze, and I couldn't find work for 6 months, would you still want to be with me? He froze. Not dramatically, not obviously, but I saw it. That tiny hesitation, that fraction of a second where his mind had to calculate something instead of answering instinctively. And in that hesitation, I got my answer. He recovered quickly. Why would that even happen, he said. You're good at what you do. That's not what I asked. You're being unrealistic, he said, frustration creeping back in. Answer the question. He looked away. Then back at me. I don't see the point of this, he said. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I said, I didn't think you would. That was it. That was the moment. Not loud, not explosive, but final. Because I realized something I couldn't ignore anymore. I had been fighting to be loved by someone who had never needed to love me in the way I needed. Not really, not fully, not when it mattered. I'm done, I said quietly. He frowned. Done with what? I stood up. With this, I said, with feeling like I have to earn basic consideration in my own marriage. He stared at me, confused now, annoyed, not yet understanding. We're not finished talking, he said. I looked at him one last time. We are, I said, because everything that needed to be said had already been revealed. Not in his words, in what he couldn't say. I filed for divorce that Friday. No announcement, no warning, no final dramatic speech. Just paperwork. It was strange how something that felt so heavy emotionally could be reduced to signatures, dates, and a quiet conversation in an office with neutral-colored walls. Landon was served the next morning. I was at work when he called. The first call, I didn't answer. The second, I let it ring. By the third, I picked up, not because I wanted to talk, but because I knew he wouldn't stop until I did. What the hell is this? He demanded the second I answered. His voice wasn't calm. It wasn't confused. It was angry, like I had done something to him. It's exactly what it looks like, I said evenly. You filed for divorce? He snapped. Are you serious right now? I am. There was a sharp exhale on the other end. You're being ridiculous, he said. You're throwing away our marriage over what? Dinner? A stupid argument? That word again. Stupid. Small. Petty. I leaned back against the truck, staring out at the empty lot in front of me. I talked to you, I said, more than once. You never said anything about divorce, he shot back. I shouldn't have had to. Silence. Then louder. So this is what you do? He continued. You don't get your way, so you blow everything up? You think that's fair? To me? To the kids? I closed my eyes for a second. There it was. The shift. Not concern. Not reflection. Blame. I'm not doing this to you, I said quietly. I'm choosing not to stay in something that doesn't work. It works fine, he insisted. For you. That stopped him. Just long enough. But not enough to change anything. You're being selfish, he said finally. You're walking away from a family. I've been alone in that family for a long time, I replied. He didn't answer that. Instead, his tone changed, sharper, more desperate. So that's it, he said. You're just done? No trying to fix it? No counseling? Nothing? I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because of how late it was. I suggested counseling a year ago, I said. You said there was nothing to fix. That was different, he said quickly. Yeah, I replied, it was. Because back then, I was still willing to stay. When I got home that evening, the house felt different. Not emptier, just louder in a quiet way. Landon was there, waiting. The kids weren't. He must have sent them somewhere else. Good. This conversation didn't belong in front of them. He was standing in the middle of the living room when I walked in, like he didn't trust himself to sit. How could you do this? He asked. Not yelling this time. Just raw. I set my keys down slowly. I already told you, I said. I'm not your partner here. That's not true, he said immediately. You're blowing things out of proportion. I looked at him, really looked. And for the first time, I saw something clearly. He wasn't lying. He actually believed that, because from his perspective, nothing had been wrong. Then why didn't anything change when I told you how I felt? I asked. He hesitated. I didn't know it was that serious, he said. I did, I replied. That landed harder than anything else I had said so far. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing now. Okay, he said quickly. Fine, then we fix it. Whatever you want, dinner, time together, more communication, I can do that. There it was. The offer. The solution. The same one I had been waiting for months ago. I shook my head slowly. You shouldn't have to try to remember to treat your wife like she matters, I said. That's not fair, he snapped. I do care. Not in a way I could feel, I said. He stopped pacing, looked at me like he was trying to find the right words. I can change, he said. I believed him. That was the worst part, because I could see it now, the way he was looking at me, the urgency, the fear. He could change. He just hadn't needed to, until now. I can start making dinner, he continued. I can include you more. I can. Landon, I said softly. He stopped. You're listing things like they're tasks, I said. Like it's a checklist. He frowned. So what do you want me to do? He asked, frustration breaking through again. Just tell me and I'll do it. I held his gaze. I wanted you to want to do those things without being told, I said. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. I didn't realize, he said finally. I thought you knew I loved you. I felt something twist in my chest. Because I believed he thought that. How would I know? I asked quietly. You never showed it in ways that mattered to me. He looked down. For the first time since this started, he didn't argue. But it wasn't enough. Not anymore. Is there anything I can do to fix this? He asked. That question came too late, and we both knew it. There was, I said, months ago, when I first started telling you how I felt. I picked up my bag. You made it clear then that it wasn't important enough to change, I continued. Now I'm making a change you can't ignore. His voice cracked slightly. So that's it? He asked. You're just leaving? I paused, then nodded. Yeah, I said, because staying would have meant something worse than breaking the marriage. It would have meant breaking myself. I moved into the guest room that night. Just temporary. But even that small shift felt significant, like drawing a line I couldn't step back across. The next day I started looking at apartments. Something close to work, month to month, not permanent, just mine. That evening, there was a soft knock on the door. I opened it to find Sophie standing there. She looked up at me, hesitant. Are you mad at us? She asked quietly. My chest tightened instantly. No, I said, kneeling down to her level. Not at all. Then why are you in here? She asked. I chose my words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups have problems that don't have anything to do with kids, I said, and they need a little space to figure them out. She nodded slowly, then hesitated again. Are you still going to help me with my science project? She asked. That almost broke me. Of course I am, I said, smiling softly. I'm not going anywhere when it comes to you guys. She seemed relieved. Okay, she said. Then she hugged me quickly and ran off down the hallway. I stayed there for a second after she left, hand still on the doorframe, because that was the part that hurt the most. Not losing Landon. Losing the version of this life I thought we were building. I found an apartment by the weekend. Small, simple, but quiet in a way that didn't feel lonely. Just peaceful. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe without adjusting myself to fit into someone else's expectations. Landon called 6 times that day. I didn't answer. I texted him once. Please communicate through the lawyer for now. It wasn't cold. It was necessary. Because if I let him pull me back into conversation too soon, I knew what would happen. He would say the right things, do the right things. And part of me would want to believe it. But I wasn't doing this because he couldn't change. I was doing it because he only changed when it was too late. And that was something I couldn't unlearn. 6 weeks later, everything was quieter. Not easier, not painless, but clearer. The divorce was moving forward without the chaos I had imagined in the beginning. No screaming court battles, no dramatic ultimatums. Just paperwork, negotiations, and a slow, steady unraveling of a life that had already been falling apart long before we admitted it. Landon had tried at first, not legally, emotionally. Once it became real, once he understood that I wasn't going to change my mind, something in him shifted. Suddenly, he became the version of him I had been waiting for. Dinner ready when I came home, messages asking how my day was, softness in his voice that hadn't been there in a long time. The first time it happened, I almost didn't know how to react. I had come back to the house to pick up a few things, and the smell hit me as soon as I walked in. My favorite meal, set on the table. For a second, it felt like stepping back into a version of reality where everything had gone right. Hey, he said, almost cautiously. I made dinner. I looked at the table, then at him. 6 months ago, that moment would have meant everything to me. I would have seen it as effort, as love, as proof that I mattered. Now it felt hollow. Not fake. Just late. I'm not staying, I said gently. Something flickered across his face. Disappointment? Regret? Maybe both. I just thought, he started, then stopped. I nodded slightly. I know, I said, because I did. I knew he was trying. I knew he meant it. And that was what made it so hard. And so simple at the same time. You could have done this before, I said quietly. He swallowed. I didn't realize, he said. I thought things were fine. They were, I replied, for you. We settled the financial side faster than I expected. The house stayed with me. It had always been mine legally, and that didn't change. Landon's lawyer had pushed at first. Something about equity, shared life, contributions, but it didn't hold. In the end, we agreed on a small amount for improvements made during the marriage. Fair. Clean. Done. He kept his car, his equipment, and his work. I kept the house, my savings, and my routine. On paper, it looked simple. But what we were really dividing had never been equal to begin with. He moved in with his sister temporarily. Good school district. Stable. The kids didn't have to change schools. That mattered more than anything else. Ryan and Sophie handled it better than I expected. Kids adapt. Not because things don't affect them, because they don't have a choice. The first time Ryan came over to my apartment, he looked around carefully, like he was trying to understand how I fit into this new version of the world. It's smaller, he said. I smiled. Yeah, I said, but it's mine. He nodded, like that made sense. And somehow it did. Life settled into something different. Not the life I had imagined, but not the one I had been living either. I cooked for myself most nights, not out of necessity, out of choice. And that alone changed how it felt. No one looked at me like eating was an inconvenience. No one treated my presence like something optional. If I made something, it was because I wanted to. If I didn't, that was fine too. Melissa came over one night with takeout and wine. We sat on the floor, no real furniture yet, just talking and laughing in a way that felt easy. You seem lighter, she said at one point. I thought about that, about the constant tension I hadn't even realized I was carrying before. Yeah, I said, I think I am. Landon kept trying. Not in big ways, in small ones. Texts. Hope your day went well. Made your favorite tonight, just in case. Miss talking to you. I didn't ignore him. But I didn't lean into it either, because now I could see the pattern clearly. He had always been capable of this. He just hadn't needed to be. Until there were consequences. One afternoon, after dropping Sophie off at my place for her science project, he lingered by the door. You really seem different, he said. I am, I replied. He looked around the apartment. You seem happier, he added. I considered that. Not the easy version of happiness. Not excitement or relief. Something quieter. Yeah, I said, I am. He nodded slowly like he understood. Or maybe like he was finally trying to. Later that week, Sophie sat at my small kitchen table, carefully placing little foam planets onto sticks. What if I wanted to live on Saturn? She asked seriously. I smiled. You'd need a pretty good spacesuit, I said. She giggled. The moment felt simple. Normal. Untangled. And it hit me then. I didn't have to stay in a broken relationship to still be part of something good. I could still show up, still care, still matter, just differently. Whatever was broken between Landon and me, he didn't stand in the way of my relationship with the kids, and for that, I was grateful. A few days later, Landon asked me a question I hadn't expected. Do you think I'm a bad person? He said. We were standing outside, the kids already in the car. I shook my head. No, I said honestly, I don't think you're bad. He looked at me, waiting. I think you got comfortable, I continued, in something that worked for you. His expression shifted, and you didn't stop to ask if it was fair to me. He didn't argue, didn't defend himself, just nodded. Because this time, he understood. The divorce finalized not long after. No drama, no last-minute reversals. Just signatures, closure, and the quiet acceptance that sometimes the end of something is the only honest way to respect what it never fully was. I kept the house legally, but I wasn't ready to live in that space again. So I stayed in the apartment and treated the house as an asset, not a home. The apartment felt like mine in a way the house never had. I could invite people over without hesitation. I could sit in silence without feeling ignored. I could exist without being measured by what I provided. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. I'm not dating yet, not because I'm afraid, because I'm paying attention to what I want, to what I won't accept again, to the difference between being needed and being valued. Ryan texted me last week, asked if I could help with another project. I said yes. Of course I did, because leaving his father didn't mean leaving him, or Sophie, or the parts of my life that had been real, even inside something that wasn't. The last time I saw Landon, he stood a little longer than necessary before leaving, like there was something else he wanted to say, but didn't. And this time, I didn't wait for it, because I had already heard everything I needed to, not in what he said, but in when he finally said it. I spent years thinking I was asking for too much care, too much attention, too much partnership. I wasn't. I was just asking the wrong person.